Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this frigid day. We were saying the roads seemed a little bit clear where I live this morning, but the snow is starting to pick up now. So we appreciate your time this morning, and we hope you get some really helpful feedback and information. Today, we're really going to be talking about the recognition process. And like many things during the pandemic, that has changed a little bit. And so we're going to kind of be working through that together. If you could advance, Heidi, the first slide we have is a link to our slides, which I'm putting again in the chat for you. This is really good information, especially if you're going to be going through the application process to share back with your team. So we've kind of broken it down into some sections for you later. And so let's look at our agenda now. What we're going to start with are some data insights from the pandemic. We are going to really kind of go into that because it was a really helpful presentation that was given to Ohio Department of Education just this past week. So it's kind of breaking news. And it does have direct implications to the PBIS framework that you guys are juggling in your school buildings. So we wanted to bring you some big level highlights from that. And then we're going to spend the bulk of today looking at the current year's PBIS recognition and application process. We'll end with some SST8 and ODE updates like we normally do, and then leave time for networking. Heidi and I will be on the call until 10 o'clock. So if any of you have specific questions or want to schedule your TFI, if you're planning on going for recognition, we'll be happy to stay on the line. Okay. But we first wanted to start by hitting a little bit of a pause button. Okay. We've been doing some of these mindful minutes to kind of ease ourselves into the meetings, and we've embedded them into webinars, mostly because if you're anything like me, all of this mindfulness sounds really great, but I don't have time built in my day for it. So we're going to build it into the meetings to force you to do a little bit. And chances are a lot's probably already happened in your day. I was fourth in line for daycare drop-off. So all of you that work in elementary buildings, I'm getting a sense now to what drop-off procedures I have been helping to coach in PBIS frameworks for a year. My daughter spilled her sippy cup, and my son forgot his whole bag of masks for the week because yesterday was a day at home for all of us. And so that happened for me already. Heidi got to de-escalate me before all of you logged onto the call. And so we just wanted to pause and kind of ease into some of this content and give you a minute to look at these 5 things. This was shared with us from our consultant and coworker for PBIS, Stacy Smith. And Heidi, if you could hit the next slide. Now, in other network meetings, you guys know we really promote sharing. We do buddy chats. We've done waterfall chats. We've asked you to post to group boards, but this one is just for you. So what I'd like you to do now is write yourself a note for which one of these that you really want to work on today. For many of you, a snow day might be a nice chance to kind of do a little moment of self-care. So grab a piece of paper or even text yourself, because I know most of you probably will have your phone nearby. And which one of these things will you give yourself today? You all are taking care of a lot of people, and taking care of yourself is important as well. So I challenge you to keep this promise to yourself this week, and even share these with a friend or with a staff member that might need to hear it as well. Okay. Thank you, Melanie. I'm glad you like it. It's good to take a deep breath while we get into the work. Okay. So now we're going to start with a little bit of data, but don't leave. Okay. You guys are callers. You guys are really leaders within your school building for PBIS, which is why you're on this PBIS Leaders Network. So you have spent the year promoting these positive behaviors and social emotional health for your students, for your staff. And you've done this now for almost a full calendar year during a global pandemic. So the data you will see in these next couple slides will probably not surprise you based on your current reality and the work that you're doing every day. but it will put into context, I think, a little bit of this work and why it's so stressful. So on February 10th, not even a week ago now, the Ohio Department of Education presented this topic to SST consultants across the state. And the topic was how the pandemic is affecting the 2020-2021 school year. And so I did put a link. This header is also a link to the website that you can find a lot more information. Okay. So the first visual that we'd like to show you is a visual representation to probably, no surprise of all of you, what you guys have been feeling. Okay. This is the shifting education delivery models throughout the last year. And so there is an interactive map that's updated weekly on the Reset Restart page, which was a surprise to me. That was really impressive that they're keeping up with this. But let's take a look at how these models have changed over time, okay? So here are some facts that the share of the total enrollment in districts using a fully remote model has decreased. It was 31% in September, down to 13% in November, then back up to 47% in January 7th. Okay, so despite the trend towards more remote education seen in the fall, this recent data really suggests that districts are striving to return students to the classroom. And we know that the push for vaccines has really been making a strong effort to getting us in the upcoming weeks. So what does this mean for PBIS? This probably means that some students and some staff have been out of a school building for a full year. Okay, the closure was March 13th last year. This has been almost a full year. And for those of you that have not been out for a full year, your school has probably had to shift the key principles of this PBIF framework to meet these various models throughout that whole calendar year. Okay, so maybe you created expectations for joining classrooms on Google Meet, and now you're shifting back to procedures to maintain social distancing in your hallways, changing your cafeteria procedures. So your PBIS framework has had to be flexible as the model of your district has changed. The next one that really felt like a strong connection to PBIS as well is that with these shifting service delivery models and connectivity issues across the state, which we could spend a whole network meeting on, but we will not today, there have been noticeable changes in student enrollment. Okay, so this slide is really zooming in on the state's youngest learners. And so for those of you that have preschool in your district or in your building, this is really pertinent. The total enrollment in pre-K through 12 public schools decreased by 53,000 students this year. Okay, that's a lot. That's a 3% decrease between fall 2019 and fall 2020. So the trend data had been showing a decrease in overall enrollment in previous years. So this is kind of maintained steady, but nowhere near this level. So other years were closer to 0.2 or 0.3. This year was 3%. This was especially pronounced for preschool, which saw a 27% decrease for preschool. So again, what does this mean for your building and why am I talking about it now? The question really is where do these kids go? So many of you have been meeting on other networks, meetings talking about attendance and finding your missing kids. And they seem to have been disappearing from building rosters, right? We know that community and e-school enrollment grew by 50%. So that's big, but that really only accounted for about 13,000 students. And the state doesn't have specific data on this yet. So school districts are really grasping at finding those students, okay? Now, it was stressed also, if we could stay on the slide for a second, that birth cohorts in the state of Ohio have been relatively steady, okay? So there aren't 27% fewer preschool age students in the state. They're here, but they're just not in your schools. So as a reminder, kindergarten is required, but that the compulsory age of schooling is at age 6. So parents had the option here and parents chose some parents chose to keep their kids home, okay? So what you should be expecting, and why I'm bringing this up on the PBIS network, is that in the fall 2021, these kids are coming back. Kindergarten classes will be big, class sizes will be much different, and your kindergarten population may not have all been in school before. Okay, so as we think about the framework, we think about setting expectations, procedures, routines in the fall 2021, we can project that a lot more students will be filling up your classrooms and need access to school that they have not seen before. Okay. So in the next slide, we looked at enrollment. What we're going to look at now is attendance. This is another issue that you guys have brought up at past PBIS networks. So as a reminder, enrollment is not the same as attendance, right? So students can enroll in your school and in your district, but still not show up or log in. And attendance is one of the biggest significant factors for student success. So first of all, a little caution on the data you're seeing here. Ohio is still moving towards collecting targeted statewide data. So the data here is really a sample, because what the department has done is partner with its network of, it's called Stay in the Game Network Partners. So those include the Cleveland Browns Foundation, Proving Group, and Attendance Works. And so what they did was a sample that'll still give some insight into other trends that we're seeing in the state. Okay. What we see here is that chronic absenteeism is up across all districts in the sample group, and the decrease is more evident in urban school districts. Also noteworthy was that they found that patterns of absenteeism in elementary buildings are beginning to mirror the high levels that were previously only seen in secondary levels. Okay, so again, I'm looking at some faces, it probably isn't surprising, but again, it's one of those things that the data really is confirming. So what does this one mean for PBIS? Is that students' attendance can become a data marker for your students needing more intensive supports. And you guys have started to do that either formally or informally through conversation. So members of your tier 2 or tier 3 or specialized behavior support teams can be really helpful in investigating what supports that these students or their families need, and really investigating why they are not showing up. Okay. And the last one we'll see, thanks for sticking with us with the data, is that not only is chronic absenteeism on the rise overall, but the gap is widening. We've brought you a lot of information about racial discrepancies and discipline data, and this is really kind of mirroring what we see of that discrepancy. So Black and Hispanic groups of students have always shown a wider gap in chronic absenteeism, but that gap is getting bigger now. So this is another thing we're bringing to your attention. Okay, so we looked at shifting service delivery models. We thought about our youngest learners, and now we have some data that's confirming about the rise of chronic absenteeism. Okay, you're welcome, TJ. Thank you for the feedback. So I'm just going to pause. And if you can throw into the chat, when you look at that data, is there something that you notice or is there something that you wonder? Click back through your slides, and I'm just going to give everybody a processing moment now before we convert this into what this means for applications. Shannon and Lisa are thinking the same thing. It must be the middle school mind of fearing the widening academic gap and wondering how you're going to fill that with the students. Yes, thank you, girls. Amanda, great question. Thinking about preschool numbers and how many preschool programs did not accept peer models this year. We have seen that. Yeah. That would be a really great one also for us to take back to Stephanie or Stacy and Michelle, who aren't on the call today, but are early learning consultants, because they have a good pulse on that, and they have been talking about that at our internal PBIS meetings as well. Okay. Heading for big gaps. Okay, so we don't have answers, but hopefully that chat is giving some comfort that you guys aren't alone in thinking all of these, and it's also giving Heidi and I some ideas of supports to bring to either future networks or future kind of little PD on demands for the group. Okay. Oh, Shannon, 80+ attendance plans. I hear you. Now you have data to back up, okay? Your building's not alone in that. Okay, so why we brought this to your attention now is we are going to look at PBIS recognition, but we can't do so without acknowledging the impact that COVID has had in your building this year. So Heidi, if you could go to the next slide. Here are some things for you guys to be thinking about, okay? If you have been virtual for a while, does your team have enough data to apply? We're going to go into kind of the specific evidence that will need to be collected. And we are aware of some of our past really strong programs that have received recognition, just really struggling with maintaining their evidence and maintaining their normal meeting cycles. So be thinking about that. Does your building evidence match your school setting? Okay, so in other words, if you have gone completely virtual and the only matrix you submit is for a brick and mortar setting, that will be something that we give some feedback on. You know, have you really created evidence to match what your building reality is? Will the collection of evidence be too much stress on your staff? I know we've talked about that almost every year, but especially now, we wanted to put that out and acknowledge that. And if your school is still virtual, how will the walkthrough component of the tiered Fidelity inventory be collected? Okay, so Heidi and I are going to go through some specifics of who needs Heidi or not, or I in the TFI, but as you all know that have gone through recognition before, the tiered Fidelity inventory is a required component. And so if you are all virtual, similarly to those who have had to do virtual evaluations, how will that look? We have included a link here. We won't go to it now, but a little brief that goes through how to conduct the TFI and walkthrough remotely from the Center on PBIS. It's a really good thing to kind of help your planning process with that. Okay. We also want to say that as we acknowledge the work of your buildings, we also want to acknowledge the progress of your team. You want to give yourself credit for your accomplishments. So have you altered your system to meet changing needs of your setting? Has your focus changed during lack of or differing data? A lot of our buildings have said, you know, because of the increase of social distancing protocols and procedures overall, we don't have the issues that we did. Okay, a lot of buildings are saying our arrival and dismissal is better than it ever has been because we're trying to keep people staggered and apart. So think about some of those progress markers. And also, has your entrance criteria for tier 2 or tier 3 evolved? We just looked at absenteeism. We looked at kind of missing students or students that are having a hard time completing work at home. Okay, a lot of your buildings, knowing those of you on the call, have done a lot of family supports and setting up work environments at home, which is really a tier 2, tier 3 support. So it's important now, whether you use our data slides or kind of any of those takeaways, just to remember to go back to your staff, whether you go through acknowledgement process formally with the state or not, to really give credit. Anyone who has maintained this work with everything else going on really deserves some acknowledgement for that. Okay, so that is my fun part. And now Heidi's going to go into probably the reason why you came, which is what we know to date about the current state recognition process.
So when Stephanie and I put this presentation together, we really were, had really no knowledge of what the new 2021 acknowledgement system was going to look like. I have to be honest and say, I have a meeting on Friday with the state network where I'm going to get details, but I was able to kind of preview our agenda. So I do have some information. I hope it's not premature to share it because I know we're going to be talking about it on Friday with the state network, but there are a couple of things that I think I can share that really that you guys can know, and it's not really going to be putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. So really the steps in the recognition process will be very, very similar as in the past. We really want to make sure that the TFI is going to be completed, and that is going to be something that always is going to be the case when we talk about recognition. That is one of the biggest parts of the recognition process is completing the TFI. You're going to want to think about the walkthrough considerations, as Stephanie said. If you are remote, there is going to be consideration for that. If you are face-to-face, I actually am scheduled to do a face-to-face walkthrough coming up here quickly, which I'm really excited about because we're not doing that so much anymore. But really thinking about that and make sure that you have that 70% at each level that you need. We're going to be talking in a minute about the SST participation. In some cases, you will need SST participation. In some cases, you will not. We'll talk specifically about that. We'll talk about number 3, the collection of specific evidence that will be shared with us. And then we'll talk about that check, everything that you really need to turn in as far as your discipline data, your completed application, your summary statement, a checklist that is required this year, and a team photo in JPEG format. And I do have an indication by looking at the agenda for Friday that the deadline is being pushed up to May 1st. That is new this year. In past, we have done a June 15th deadline. And so that is going to be, that's going to be significantly earlier this year for getting your application in. Sorry about that. So that this first step in the process then is completing the tiered fidelity inventory. We have linked it in that first bullet. You can find it there. Those of you, most of you on the call are very familiar with that tool, but if you want to see the entire tool, it can be found at that link. The walkthrough component, we always recommend completing first because it's easier to go through the survey if you have the 3 data points that you need from the walkthrough. So when you schedule with your SST consultant, it's really good that you schedule to complete the walkthrough portion first. The TFI also must be completed as a team. So the team needs to get together and collectively score the rubric. I know in past, when trying to do silver and gold awards, it's a lot to do all 3 levels at the same time. So you might want to consider how to break that up. Tier 1, if you've been doing it for a while, can be done pretty quickly. Tier 2 and 3 take a little more time. Tier 3, particularly when you're auditing behavior intervention plans, really does take a long time. So that's something else to consider. And then the last bullet there talks about having that data entered into PBIS apps to calculate your subscores and get your percentage. And you have to do that as part of the process for recognition. The other thing that we want you guys to consider is if you are an elementary building that houses a preschool program, you want to think about how you're going to apply. The application is going to prompt you for indicating what grades your building serves. We as coaches and the state of Ohio would really have you consider, if you are housing a preschool program, that really should be one application. If there is circumstances such that the preschool is in a really different place, or they really operate outside of the elementary school, you can consider applying as a preschool in and of itself and a school age building in and of itself. But we really want you to consider thinking about, if you're not already having representation on your leadership team from the preschool, having considerations for teaching, reinforcing your error correction system, everything being very embedded with the preschool as well as the school age being very connected. We would highly encourage you to do that. We do realize, however, though, that there are some cases that's very difficult to do. One example I can think of is we have a building where a preschool is embedded in a high school building, and that really does not make sense for them to apply together. But if you are in an elementary building, if the preschool is housed within the elementary, we really would coach you to think about how do you bring those 2 entities together, and how you can really apply and operate, not just apply, but operate as one team and one PBIS structure. So thinking about that, if you have specific questions about that, we would definitely direct you to Michelle and Stacy regarding those considerations as well. And they were not able to join us, unfortunately, today on the call. So the second part of the application process is who needs the SST participation. The SST participation, we would highly, highly encourage for first-time applications. If you have applied in the past and you are only going for bronze, you can apply and do the TFI if you have someone trained to go ahead and do that independently, and then just submit your evidence and application to us. So if you are a first-time application, we would highly recommend that SST is involved. The only time that you would not have SST involved would really be those bronze applications for somebody who has training within administering the TFI, and it's not the first time through. If you are applying for silver or gold this year, we would say that the SST participation is required, and it would be required at all 3 levels. So if you are applying for silver, the SST consultant does have to be part of that bronze, that tier 1. And for gold, same thing. SST has to be involved with tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. I think what's going to happen this year, from looking at the agenda from Friday, is we are going to be doing a process that's going to be similar to what we did last year. We are only going to be seeking applications this year for people who are either looking for an award for the first time, or for people who want to go, buildings who want to go up a level. So if you were awarded any level last year, if you want to keep your level, it appears to me from what I've seen, and again, I'm going to say this with a grain of salt because I have not attended the meeting yet, it appears to me you can hold over once again your level from last year. It looks like only new applications and applications for buildings going up are going to be required this year. And I will confirm that definitely with when I go to the meeting on Friday, and I'll let folks know. If you guys are not on my network list, please let me know that, or put your name in the chat, and I will make sure that you get on the list, because that's really how we send out a communication regarding that kind of thing. The next thing to think about is, do you know who your SST person is, your SST consultant? I think everyone on the call does. If you do not, you'll need to know who your SST consultant is so that they can help administer and facilitate the TFI. So it's going to be one of these 4. That's Stephanie, myself, Michelle, or Stacy. And if you do not know who that person is, we would ask right now that I'm going to ask you to private chat Stephanie Denham, because I'm going to be continuing to go through. But if you are not sure who your SST consultant is, please send her a private chat sometime during our call, and she can let you know who you need to contact if you need to facilitate a TFI. So we'll give you a minute to kind of do that. I'll also at this time just kind of break before we continue with the process and open it up for any questions. You can go ahead and populate the chat box, or you can unmute. Any questions so far regarding what we've shared for network recognition, or I should say state recognition through the network? And I see TJ, who is on that work group, and she's joining us from Region 11, is saying that this is the proposal to ODE. So everything I'm telling you at this point is really, you take it with a grain of salt. It's not in stone. But we wanted you guys to be prepared in case this comes to fruition, so that you know what it is that you need to prepare, because the deadline is going to come very, very quickly this year with May 1st. If you want, our understanding, provided ODE approves, if you were silver last year, Stacy, and want silver next year, you do not have to reapply. If you were gold last year, gold will also be held over. You do not need to reapply. And again, this is what's going to be proposed to ODE. We don't know for sure. So it's to hold that, whatever that level was. It looks like we're proposing only new teams, and teams going up a level or 2 levels would have to reapply. So I think I covered what was in the chat. Any other questions before we kind of move on? Okay, so for the third part of the process is you'll want to be collecting your specific evidence. I'm going to assume the way we did it last year was any of the bolded items on the application itself, you would need to have all of those items to be able to give yourself a 2 for that item on the TFI. So for example, I know for the first few, it's going to say things like, do you have a list for your team of your team members and their role? And do you have all of your meeting notes and agendas for this year? To give yourself a 2, you need to be able to produce that evidence. If you are submitting to us either hard copy or digitally, we are reminding you that each piece of evidence should be labeled by TFI item. And we realize that certain pieces of evidence can go in multiple places. So please make sure that that's denoted as you label that. I think as long as the state is okay with it, we are still going to accept paper as well as electronic evidence. Electronic is preferred because it's easier for us. But a caveat to that, guys, is we have run into this issue every year we've done this, and that is the sharing permissions in Google. A lot of times, particularly at tier 2 and 3, when we start to get into documents that are sensitive and confidential in nature, a lot of times when applications and evidence are turned in, the consultants cannot access the document that's submitted. So we have to go through an entire application and request multiple times of permission to look at those documents. So as a lesson learned for us, if you are planning on doing electronic submission this year, please make sure the sharing permission, you're sharing up with us the sharing permissions. It's really, really difficult for us to score and look at evidence and compare when we have to constantly go back and request permissions. So please be aware of that. We want to also remind you, we don't want to see any identifiable information on that evidence. And then we, as in last year, anybody who applied for either a new level or for the first time applications, you did receive a rubric with feedback on your applications. And basically what we do is you guys have already gone through the TFI, but we go through the evidence and we kind of rescore it. And then we give you the, I don't want to say adjudicated, but I guess an adjudicated score where we kind of look at what you have submitted and then we rescore it. Last year, there wasn't anybody that still did not meet the 70% cutoff, but we will do that again this year, probably regardless if that would be required by the state. We will be using those rubrics again, and you will get feedback based on that. So make sure that, and I have in that link there, I have given the folder for what those rubrics look like. So we don't want it. The rubrics are really nothing more than what the TFI is, just kind of expanded. So if you're curious to see how we're going to provide that feedback, that link is there for you with those rubrics. So you can take a look at those if you're curious, but that is how the feedback will be provided to you. Questions about that, I'll pause because that's a lot on that one slide. Okay.
Heidi, I just want to jump in and say that what has worked for some of my teams in the past is they'll make a copy of documents that they want to use for evidence and then just change the name of that to the TFI item it aligns with. That way it'll keep your original document intact. And then the copies, you can go ahead and redact student identifying information or other things. So a copy sometimes works better. Just share that folder outside your organization, and then your drive is kept pretty clean. And TJ from 11 also said that she'll share the electronic submission application with you, Heidi, at your next meeting.
Great. TJ and I are actually meeting tomorrow for a separate reason, but that'll be great. Thanks, TJ. Appreciate that. This slide is just reminding you guys that we do have that regional warehouse, and within that regional warehouse, we have tier 1 and tier 2 examples from our region. If you are not sure what kind of evidence to include in your submission, we have great examples from our whole region. Also in that folder is all of the copies of our network meetings. And I have added today a recognition 2021 folder. So I will be populating that with any, if TJ shares the electronic electronic applications with me, any information regarding 2021, the rubrics are also in there, how we score and provide feedback. So that's all in our PBIS warehouse. So remember, if you ever have questions, you can always ask, but you can always go back to that warehouse to take a look at what's required. I will tell you from the paper copies that I've seen that I've already previewed before my meeting on Friday, the application has changed a little bit. So we want you to be aware that if it is accepted by ODE, it's going to be a little bit different. There's a little bit different of I think we've really in Region 8 been doing pretty much what's on the application, but it's going to be there's going to be more of an emphasis on really making sure you're doing each piece of that recognition, which includes filling out that application, which sometimes in the past people present us with evidence, but have not really filled out the application thoroughly. So that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at this year as well. So the fourth step in the process would be then filling out that application. Last year was the first time we had the checklist. This year, it looks like the checklist is going to appear on the first part of the application. And that checklist really is going to be there for you to remind you of all the pieces, parts that you need to submit. So make sure you do fill out that checklist. The rubric is actually what is in the application regarding those bolded items and the evidence that needs to be submitted. So when we say rubric, we're really talking about, if you've seen the application in the past, there's a bronze, a silver, and a gold section. And really you want to be checking off those boxes as to what evidence that you're turning in, and making sure that if we've scored it a 2, that you have included all of those bolded items. The school profile template always is a required item that we require from the teams that are applying for recognition. And that template is collecting evidence that actually goes to the state. If the ODE approves what the group has suggested, that profile template is a little bit more lengthy, a little bit different this year. So make sure that that is something that you make sure that you fill out. There's a little bit more to it than what I've seen in the past. We've always asked you for an impact statement. The impact statement really talks about how PBIS has changed in your building or district. It looks like the network is proposing some changes to that this year. One thing that we've always done is that if your building or district has had a finding with SPP indicators, you have to address either how your building is not contributing to that issue in the district, or you have to, in that statement, say how you are addressing that issue with that finding. This year, they're talking about really addressing the issue of the pandemic and how your PBIS framework has been responsive to that, and how you are going to go forward next year with pandemic considerations, whether that's in person or remote learning. So the impact statement is something I know when we started this process years ago, many teams would forget to do. This year, it's going to be really important for two reasons. One, if your district or building does have a finding, it has to be addressed there. And the new questions look like, if approved by ODE, that you're going to have to somehow address the pandemic and how you've been responsive to that. So that's something else to think about. And then the last thing teams always forget is that team photo. It's really nice if you're applying for recognition. They put together this beautiful slideshow, and it's nice to have your team represented. I know issue in the past is people will send them not in JPEG format. Please make sure that you have that, if you're going to submit a photo, which I would encourage that you do have that in JPEG format. So the next couple slides just show you who we have in the region that have been previously awarded. If there are districts that you would like to follow up with, if you have relationships with these buildings and districts, we would encourage you to reach out to them and ask them, hey, how did you apply? What's been your process? If you have a question from the district's perspective or from a building perspective, we would say, go ahead and reach out to these folks. In the next couple slides, I'm going to just kind of briefly go through. We'll show you who our last year's award winners are. This slide will show the bronze, and I'll give you a second to look at that. This slide will show you our silver winners from last year. And this slide will show you our few gold award-winning schools. And then, of course, our district awardees from last year. So I would just like to reemphasize that, I went ahead and took a sneak peek at the application for next year. I'm imagining that it's going to be very similar. There may be some changes since we are waiting on ODE approval. So everything that Stephanie and I have kind of shared with you today, really take that with a grain of salt because things can change. The few things that we know won't change is you must do a TFI. You must do that TFI with your SST consultant, particularly if you're a first-time school or you're applying for gold or silver this year. We know you're going to have to collect evidence. We know that you're going to have some application forms to fill out, some of the school profile templates to fill out. Those really will not change because that's what we've done in the past. Some of the things that we're talking about as far as holdovers, some of the other things regarding the rubrics, those are things that we're still kind of waiting for ODE on some clarification on, but I know that we will in our region continue to use those rubrics and continue to do the processes we've done in the past. So if you've been through the process, you kind of already know what that looks like, I think, for the most part. So we would like to open it up right now to you guys on the call. If your building or district has received recognition in the past, what tips or tricks would you share with the group? And so we'll open up the chat box, and we'll also open up, you can open up your mic if you'd like, if there are some things that you think that you've been through this process before would be helpful to others, and if you'd like to share that.
I can just say we're in Medina, and I think one of the best things that we've done is keep a running digital folder of all of our things. And as a tier 1 and tier 2 team, we just try to update it like every month when we meet, just a quick 5 or 10 minutes at the start of our meetings, make sure that our meeting notes are all up to date. And then that way, when it's time for application, we don't have to try to pull all of that together. And the nice part is that if you already have it digital, then you can just make a copy for the next year and you've already got the format. So that has been a lifesaver for us.
I think that's one of the benefits, I should say, of doing it electronically, is that you can just continue to keep those are living documents, and you can continue to update those and then just share with us what you have. I know there are people that don't like it for particular reasons, but for keeping things updated and current and fluid, I think it's a great way to do that. And then it makes recognition a lot easier when you go to share the documents. It's not like you have to collect all this evidence, and it's really living the framework. We would always encourage it. This is not a process where you just collect your hard copies or your digital copies for compliance purposes. This is a living, breathing framework, and I think that also helps knowing and living that living, breathing framework that you can use that format. Yeah, I think that's great. Other tips or tricks or lessons learned? Regarding applying for recognition?
Heidi, I know you weren't asking me, but I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
I think it's helpful too for teams to, if you're a first-time building applying, make sure your team looks at the TFI before you get together to score the TFI. I think that saves a lot of time.
Mhm.
And then the meeting can really be spent on conversation and consensus instead of just reviewing the content for the first time.
I think that's a great suggestion. I always do recommend that to my teams as well, that they're familiar with the tool. For sure. Anybody else? Any suggestions, tips, tricks? Okay, well, if there are any others as we continue, pop them in the chat and we'll be happy to address those when those come up. So we're going to go ahead and kind of finish out our PBIS network this morning. And as we always do, we try to provide you with some links to resources that we hope might be beneficial to everybody. It looks like TJ has entered a Word doc into the chat that is helpful for gathering evidence. If you find it helpful, please go ahead and download that. Thanks, TJ, for additional information regarding evidence collection. So we do have a couple of resources for you. The first one is an article regarding how to lead when your team is exhausted, and you are too. It was something that we felt was a great, short, digestible article to read, and gives you some quick, easy tips about, we're already getting to that point of the year that some of you call Farch. And it's tough because we are in the pandemic and we are now in that part of the year that's difficult as it is. So there is an article for you if you find that helpful. Stephanie has also linked the entire data insights information. It is a webpage on ODE. You can download that. She only picked a couple of things to share with you. There's actually more data there that you can look at and digest or share with your buildings or district. The next one is the PBIS Recognition, Visitation, and Showcase webpage on ODE that you can go. You can see other, you can look at other buildings or districts around the whole state that have been awarded. There's information there that the network does provide other information on that page regarding recognition. So that's there for you. And then finally, we have the email address for PBIS at the state level. You can always reach out to your consultants at SST8, but if there is a question that we cannot answer, we would always direct you to the state for those questions regarding recognition, or really, that's really anything PBIS related. But if there's something specifically about recognition, then you can take a look. You can use that email address to, if we can't answer those questions, you can send those directly to ODE.